Good morning, guys. How are you? Well, we have Children's Church available right now, and if you have kids between like preschool and the 5th grade, we have a class that's available for them. They can meet the teachers in the back. If you want your kids to be with you in the worship, they are always welcome to be here with us. Okay. How many of you watched Mayweather Pacquiao? How many of you are sad today? Watch your mouth. Too soon. No, it did not go the way it should have. It went the wrong way, and everyone knows it. No. But no, we're glad you're here with us this weekend. We're wrapping up the book of Ruth today. And how many of you have ever played sports of any kind? Cheerleading's not a sport. I know Josh was a grade A cheerleader, but wrestling's a sport. Do you know what it means to, what's that?
Golf can be a sport.
Golf is hard. No. Man, stepped on a toe. No. But how many of you know what it means to choke in a sport? When they choke, right? It's when you got the game on the line, right? You have the perfect opportunity to win. You're in the right place at the right time. It all hangs on how you play. You take the shot that determines if you're going anywhere. You know, you're either going to Disney World or you're going home, right? And a perfect example of choking, if you don't really know, is this last year's Super Bowl. Too soon? No. No. Seahawks. Did you know? Oh, well. Oh, great. Well, you're going to enjoy this. No, Seahawks, they're what? They're on the 1-2 yard line. They have Marshawn Lynch, right? One of the greatest running backs this last season. All they need to do is just punch the ball through to the end zone, right? The game was essentially over. They're in the right place at the right time. And so what does Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson do? They pass on the 1 yard line. Well, apparently the Patriots were, because they intercepted it, and then the game was over. That was one of the most exciting Super Bowls that I've watched in a while. No matter what team you were for, that game was back and forth, and it all ended because they choked. Now, how many of you can ever remember a time that you've choked? And I don't necessarily just mean in sports. You know what I mean? All you had to do was not mess up, right? But you dropped the ball. Maybe you did this in sports. Maybe you did this in life. Ever dropped the ball at work? Big project coming up. There's an important deadline. And somehow you miss an email, or you miss a meeting, or you took something the wrong way, and now the whole project's blown. Sometimes we do this in a relationship. You know, I called Tamara once. That was almost it. That was almost the end of our relationship. There was almost never a Morgan, Josh, and John Lemagne. That was almost the end. Maybe you did this in a marriage. Maybe you did this in a friendship. Maybe you did this as a parent. Sometimes, you know, the problem isn't that we just miss something. Sometimes we're in the right place. We're in the right time. We have the perfect opportunity to hit the home run, to make the game-winning shot, to do exactly the thing we need to do. But we choke. We pass on the goal line. We punt on the goal line. And maybe we panic. Maybe we freeze up. Maybe we think it's not a big deal. Maybe we don't even realize that it's happening. But afterward, it's clear that we choked. And that's what we're talking about today. Last week we left off, we're in the book of Ruth, as I said, and we left off with Ruth and Boaz. And Ruth proposed to Boaz. She said, hey, you're my kinsman. You could be my kinsman redeemer. And we talked about what that meant. Will you please rescue me from my situation? But Boaz said there was something he needed to take care of first, because Boaz was the kinsman redeemer, but he wasn't the first option to be kinsman redeemer. If you remember, a kinsman redeemer was someone on your husband's side of the family that if your husband died and left you with no children, another person from his family would take you in under his wing. He would economically provide for you. And one of the ways he did that was he provided you with children. You didn't have Social Security back then. You didn't have retirement. Your only hope for a future was having kids, because when you got older, you needed them to take care of you. And Boaz is a relative to Elimelech, but Boaz says, well, there's actually someone closer. There's someone who it's their first option to be your kinsman redeemer. But to show his good intentions, he gives Ruth 6 measures of grain, which was kind of like making a down payment. He wasn't like a lot of us husbands who said, well, I'll do it, but I'll get to it later. Ladies, how many of your husbands tell you that they're going to do something? Well, in 6 months, we will. We will. Just give us time, and eventually we'll get to it when we feel like it. But Boaz isn't doing that, right? He gives her, especially early on when there was money, but money didn't have that same symbolism. When you had something that you could give, it was like paying a dowry. It was like saying, no, I'm absolutely sure that I am going to take care of you. And just to prove my good intention, here's these measures. And he's serious. And so Ruth goes back to Naomi. She tells her what happened. She says, hey, look at what he gave me. And Naomi is like, wow, this thing is going down today. She's like, he's serious. So whether it's him or someone else, you will be married by the day's end. And in 4 verse 1, we're told that Boaz does not waste time. He marches into Bethlehem looking for redemption. He's looking to redeem Ruth. It says in 4:1, now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, turn aside, friend, and sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. There's that behold again, just by chance. Just by chance. If you still believe that all of this stuff has been happening by accident, if you believe that Ruth just so happened to go to Boaz's field on the day that he just so happened to be checking on it, and then Boaz just so happens to run into exactly who he needs to run into, you have more faith than I do. This is not an accident. There are too many things that happen to work out, to not believe that God is orchestrating this. What is accident or luck or chance for us is providence by God. He has been setting this up. And Boaz says to the relative, he says, come here, friend, except in Hebrew he doesn't say friend. You know what it literally is in Hebrew? Hey, what's your face? Hey, Mr. Nobody. That's literally what it is. And it's not like Boaz forgot his name, right? Because the second that Ruth proposed, he said, I can't do this, there's someone ahead of me. He knew exactly who was in the way, right? It's this guy. You would know his name, right? Do you remember, guys, if you're married, how many of you had have wives that had boyfriends that were in the way? Floyd. You did not forget his name. Floyd is a jerk in your way, right? And Tim conquered, right? Here, here. Way to go, Tim. But he knows this guy's name, but it doesn't, he knew that there was a relative closer, right? He hasn't forgotten. He's not like, hey, you know what, any of you know Brian Regan? Hey, buckaroo. Hey, partner. I mean, it's not partner. No, he knows exactly who this guy is. And we'll talk more about this nameless guy in a while. But Boaz says, why don't you talk for a minute? I have some business to discuss with you. And verse 2 says that Boaz calls the elders. It says he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down, and they sat down. The Hebrew word for elder, literally, is the bearded ones. And so every time I read this, I'm like, he got ZZ Top together. You know? So Boaz is like, you guys would make good witnesses, you know? And so, but the idea of this, why he got elders together, is before there were kings, city elders served in a judicial capacity to give official legal status to agreements. So they're here acting kind of like notary publics. You ever have to do that when you were buying your house? You needed signed documents. You went to a library or a bank and you had to sign it in front of the notary public and they'd stamp it. That's basically what this is. You got the witnesses there to say that the deal went down. So Boaz and What's-His-Face and ZZ Top are all sitting down, and Boaz tells them about this piece of land left by Elimelech. It says in verse 4, "So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, because there's no one to redeem it, and I am after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Okay, here's What's-His-Face, right? Mr. Nobody. He hears there's land. What does he say? "I'll take it." Me. He's buying the house sight unseen, which is really good for business decisions, by the way. Just buy random pieces of property. It doesn't matter where they are. But he says, "I'll take it." He just says sold. Because the land is a way to increase wealth, right? Because you could grow more crops on it. You could have more to sell. You could have more to save for a rainy day. It's really a good thing. I mean, even today, you know how much land costs? It's ridiculous. I've looked at buying acreage in Andover, $110,000 an acre. Just the acre. That's ridiculous. Land is wealth. They're not making any more land, are they? Not really. Unless you got a volcano that's going to blow somewhere, but I'd suggest you wait a while. But I mean, wouldn't you like to find out that you had a rich relative who died and left you something? Absolutely. I get emails from Nigeria all the time about these rich uncles who've died. And they've left me all this stuff that if I would just email them my social security number and my bank number and some personal information, I could be swimming in money. Like, I just need one of those emails to be true and my identity back. But What's-His-Face says, "There's land, I'll take it," which is exactly what Boaz hoped he would say. Because now that he has his attention, Boaz is going to read him the small print. He says in verse 5, "On the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance." There's a catch, right? It's not just a real estate deal. It comes with a mother-in-law who calls herself bitter. There's a problem there, right? Do you want to inherit a bitter mother-in-law? Now, none of you all guys have bitter mother-in-laws, right? You all have great mother-in-laws. Jan's looking at her husband, right? Oh, no, you have a great mother-in-law. Shame on you, Bill. But he inherits a mother-in-law who calls herself bitter, a wife who's a Moabitess, and the guy doesn't really even know what kind of woman she is, right? He just hears, oh, there's this pagan woman I got to marry. And then he's got to eventually give the land back to her so that she could raise the kids they would have together on it. I mean, and all of a sudden, this land deal doesn't look so good, right? Like if you were going to buy a house and the realtor said, okay, we want to make an offer. Great. And then after you made an offer, they said, hey, by the way, the people who live here, they're going to stay. Oh, and they're going to live with you too. Oh, and you see that woman? You got to marry her. What? I don't want to do that. That's crazy. So look at what What's-His-Face says. He says in verse 6, I cannot redeem it for myself because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. Now, we talked about this last week. The kinsman redeemer law was not in place so that men could have extra women. Every time that we see in the history of the Bible where the kinsman redeemer is brought up, every time it's brought up, there's a guy who says, not me. If this was about having extra women, he'd be like, yes, right? Every guy runs from it. Every guy runs from it. They don't want the complication. He says, I want the land, but I don't want the woman. And even though Ruth was beautiful, he doesn't want the trouble. He was good with this deal when it was just, hey, I get rich, right? That sounds good. He's excited to take the land, but the second that Ruth's involved, he's washing his hands of it. No amount of wealth is worth the responsibility of taking care of Ruth and taking care of Naomi. And really, when you think about it, that has been this man's attitude the entire time. This guy was the closer relative to Elimelech, right? He was supposed to be the kinsman redeemer, right? So why hasn't he shown up in the story until right now? This guy should have shown up in Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. The day that Ruth and Naomi came back. He should have been there to say, how can I provide for you? He wasn't going to do anything to help them. I mean, doesn't that bother us? Like, this whole law is about providing for widows. And what has he done? How long has Ruth been at Boaz's? And how long has Boaz been taking care of her, doing his job for him? This guy is like a deadbeat dad. This is your responsibility. Show up and take care of your kid. This is your responsibility. Show up and take care of these widows. All he can think about is the way that Ruth and Naomi affect his plans, his fortune, his future, his family. It puts what he's worked for in jeopardy. And so what does he do? This really affects my plans for life, so why don't you do it? He just gives it away. This is the kind of man who walks by the man on the side of the road in the story of the Good Samaritan. I have to worry about me first. And so he tells Boaz to take the land since he said he wanted it. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think Boaz cared about the land? He had land, right? The dude is rich. Does he need it? Absolutely not. He's not there for the land. He's there for Ruth. He loves Ruth. What's his face didn't want was exactly what Boaz wanted. He loved Ruth, and so he was happy to do this. And so in verse 7 it says, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the land, concerning the redemption and exchange of land, to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. They trade shoes. I really like the way this reads. It's almost like it's saying, hey, we used to do this, but then it got weird. But just so you know, this is how we did things back then. Trading shoes was a symbol of land transfer. The land you used to walk on was now someone else's land. And so Boaz married Ruth, and they lived happily ever after, except that's not actually the end of the story, is it? Ever notice how Disney only tells you how a couple falls in love? Do they ever tell you, like, what happens later? Do they show, like, Cinderella with back pain from her pregnancy and Prince Charming sitting on the couch with the newspaper? You know, do they show? No, they never do that. I mean, what happened next in the story? It's almost like they make falling in love the end of the story. Falling in love is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the story. That's the start. And for those of you who are married, who are newlyweds or dating, you need to hear this. Falling in love is the beginning of your story. The real story is marriage. Too many people rush to the altar to get hitched, thinking that that's the goal. I can't tell you how many people who I've met with in my time and in my ministry said, oh yeah, we want to get married. And I say, well, we're going to do premarital counseling because after you get married, you got to kind of live together. And they were like, oh, well, we don't really need to go through that. We know we love each other. It's like, well then, great. If you know you love each other, you don't need me to marry you. I mean, it's amazing how many people get so excited for the wedding, but then they're disappointed afterwards. Because happily ever after was never defined for them. They never knew what that was. They never knew what they were looking for. They never knew how they were going to live together. It's the life after that matters. I don't care about a wedding. I care about a marriage. And in Ruth and Boaz's lives, this is just the beginning of their story because they end up having kids, and they have a son named Obed. And you know what? Obed has a son named Jesse. And you know Jesse? He has a son named David. And David was a shepherd who killed a giant, who became king. And his lineage was one that would last forever. That's what he was told. And that came true in Jesus Christ because while she is the great-grandmother of King David, he's the great, so many more greats, grandfather of Jesus. Her redemption in Bethlehem led to our redemption in Bethlehem. And Ruth, this Moabite, this woman someone didn't want, ends up being the great-grandmother to a king and a great-great-great-grandmother to the Son of God. This Moabitess. And all of those just so happens in the book of Ruth. Were each instances of God not only redeeming Ruth, but each and every one of us. If you think it's an accident, why that happened. If you think it's an accident, why we're here today. It's not. We are sitting here because God brought a Moabite pagan woman out of Moab. He used Elimelech's selfishness and lack of foresight. He used him going into Moab to reach a woman that no one would want, to bring her in, to make her the great-grandmother of a king and a greater-grandmother of our Savior. And he used her by way of Jesus to rescue us. And thank God there was a Boaz in that story, you know? Now here's the question I want us to think about as we're closing up Ruth. Who is the only character in the book of Ruth without a name? What's his face? Mr. Nobody. Oh, that's true. But they're more generally taken. But here's a guy. He's a main part of the story. He's got a speaking part, right? And he doesn't have a name. Why? Think about it. I mean, the only guy who doesn't have a name in the book of Ruth is the guy who passes over redeeming her. I mean, think about how different the story goes. If it had just gone a little different, we would know this guy's name. We would know who he is. He would be David's great-great-grandfather. He would be in the lineage of Jesus. He was in the right place at the right time, and what'd he do? He dropped the ball. He choked. He passed on the goal line during the Super Bowl. All he had to do was run the ball in. All he had to do was his job. And he could have had everything, but instead he just gives it away. And now all we know about this guy is he's Mr. Nobody. He's what's his face? To peek. Someone get him a tissue. And I mean, but that's bad, right? Because when you look in the Bible, even the villains have names, right? Jezebel, Saul, Judas, Satan, right? Like they still have their names in the book. You still know them, but this guy doesn't even have his name in the book. He's just some guy. He's just a detail. He was just this thing at something that you met once. And let me tell you why that is, because when it came to redemption, he was only part way in. He had stepped in with one foot. He was doing the hokey pokey with it. He had one foot in and he kept the other out. He wanted the inheritance, but he didn't want the responsibility of redemption. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, Jesus is talking to a church in Laodicea, and I just want to read what he says to them. He says, I know your deeds, that you're neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. I'm going to vomit you up. He just says, I just want you to decide where you're going to stand. I just want you to know where you're going to be. I mean, if you were all in, I could use you. If you were all out, I could use you too. But I can't stand that you're trying to play in both worlds. And this man we don't know is lukewarm. He's only part way in. He's in the right place. It's the right time. He has this amazing opportunity in front of him. And he's too worried about what it will cost him. Now let me ask you this. When you're gone, and in heaven, the story of the gospel is told, will your name be a part of that story? And I don't mean that you need your name written in the Bible. It's done. There's no sequels. This is it. I mean, is your name in the book of life? Jesus said in Luke chapter 10, verse 20, Don't rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that what? Your name is written in the book of life. Sometimes we miss God because we're following our own plan. Sometimes we miss it because we're giving up on church. Sometimes we make up our own version of Jesus, but sometimes none of those things are the case. Sometimes everything is going right. Some of you are in the right place and at the right time. You're here. You've been to church. You've been in a connection group. You've been out and you've tried to reach people and you've served in the community. You're right where you need to be, but you know what? You're missing Jesus. You are missing what he has for you because you are more worried about what you have in this life than what you can have in the next. It's strange to me that for people, especially people who believe, that we spend all of our lives preparing for the last 10 years. What are you going to have in retirement? What are you going to have saved? But we don't spend at least that much time preparing where we're going to spend for the next 10 million years. We're worried more about what following Jesus will cost us now than the cost of not following him. And some of you are going to appear before Jesus and he's going to say, hey, what's your face? He's going to say, depart from me. I never knew you. I'm afraid of what we might miss because we've been in the right place at the right time and we're not seizing the opportunities that God is giving us. And I don't know what that is for you. I don't know what your lifeboat is. I call them lifeboats because it's like, hey, I'm going to get on the ship until it gets too hairy and then I'm going to jump off. I don't know what that is for you. I don't know what you're holding on to. Maybe it's money, like what's his face. You love God, you love people, you just don't want to jeopardize your future. Maybe it's the gospel. I have people to tell, but I'm more afraid about how I'll look than whether they believe. Maybe it's sin. Maybe you know what? Man, I've got favorite sins. Do you? Do you got the ones you fall into? Not everything tempts me. Like, going through high school, I didn't really care about trying drugs. It did not matter to me. You could hold from me and like, I don't care. It wasn't like, well, I'm spiritual. It was just, I don't care. But man, talk to me about my sins. That's a different story. Sometimes we're holding on to these things because we still believe that there's some life, there's some pleasure, there's some opportunity in keeping in our old life. Or maybe it's just that you want to go to heaven, you want the inheritance, but you just don't want to carry your cross to get there. I want to read something Jesus says. And if you notice, I say says, not said, because I believe this is something Jesus still says to us. But in the book of John, chapter 12, the week before Jesus is crucified for us, or the days before Jesus is crucified for us, he says, "He who loves his life loses it. And he who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal." If you're still holding on to this world when Jesus comes back, you'll get exactly what you're holding on to. You can't keep what's here. This world is not our home. This is not God's future for us. And thank God. You know why I want to go to heaven? Because I've been here. Right? Like, isn't that incentive? Why are we fighting so hard to hold on to the life that we have here? It can't sustain us. It can't satisfy us. We always have to have more. We have to have something else. We need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. We need to hunger and thirst for Jesus because he told me that if I hunger and thirst after him, if I drink from him, I will never thirst again. And some of us are still holding on. We're going to have communion. And communion is about letting go. This is about not my life, but the life of Jesus and the life he wants to live in me. And I can't come to this table. I can't eat the bread, which shows the life he lived for me. I can't drink the cup, which shows the death he died for me, and still hold on, and still remain the same, and still say, I'm fine. If I can come to this table, and if I can eat and drink and go back to life the way that it was, then what's the point? And I don't know what any of this means for you, but when you come up to this table, This is about us hating our life in this world. And that doesn't mean you got to be depressed or anything. That just means that when you look at how you love the world and how you love Christ, that the world is a distant second. That when you compare your love for Jesus and what you have in this world, that what you love about this world looks like hate compared to the love that you have for Jesus. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that you need to start this journey. Jesus calls us to believe. And sometimes I think we do a disservice to people and just saying, oh, just believe, you know. Like as a child when I would go to church, I almost had the same sense of Santa Claus, you know. Jesus doesn't just call me to believe in, oh yeah, I accept that. He says, come and follow me. And it's my hope that if you don't believe that you would. That this would be the start of a love story between you and Jesus. That you are not here by accident. You did not by chance just come to Epic Church. That God has been drawing you. You may have had your own reasons, but God's like, yeah, that'll work for me. And He's drawing you into a relationship with Him. I want you to know Jesus. That's why we're here. And so maybe today is the beginning of that story. Maybe you need to confess Jesus as your Lord. Maybe you need to repent. And maybe here in a couple weeks you need to get baptized. On the 24th, we're opening up the baptistry. And there's going to be people who are getting into it. And what I love about baptism is it shows that I'm dead. Because you get that idea of the body going under, the body being buried, and then it being raised to a new life. And maybe it's time that you have new life. And maybe you're here and maybe you're a believer, but maybe you've been part way in. It can't keep going that way. You can't keep coming and being in the right place at the right time and ignoring the wonderful things that Jesus has for you. And so maybe you need to come up to this table in repentance. Maybe you need to come and be all in. Maybe you need to start taking control of those opportunities that God is laying at your feet, like Ruth. And say, yes, Lord, I will go. I will do what you've asked me to do. I don't know. But one day I want to read your name in the book of life. So I'm going to pray. And as we finish up, Tim's going to be playing. Take your own time. Pray. Figure out where you're at. If you got connection cards, write on them, turn them in. We'd love to know more about you, let you know more about us. But if that's your way of trying to talk to us about Jesus, you could do that there too. If you want to talk about getting baptized, if you want to talk about first just knowing Jesus, let's talk about that. I'm going to be up here. If you don't want to wait, talk to me up here. If you don't want to come up here, you want to meet me in the hall, meet me in the hall. You want to call me, email me, I don't care how you get a hold of me, but I got to have this conversation with you. But when you're done praying, come to the table. Eat and drink, turn in your connection card, turn in your offering. Don't hold anything back from Jesus. And then join us as we sing and praise to Jesus. God in heaven, What can I say that's deserving of you? There's nothing about me that qualifies me to preach. There's nothing about me that qualifies me to lead. There's nothing about me that qualifies me to come before you. And yet you draw me to you. God, you have seen something in us that we can't imagine. And God, every time you call us and every time that you ask us to do something, every time that you try to draw us to us, we resist you and we fight and we struggle against you and we are rebellious. So God, I just pray that we would have a new heart. That you would restore us to yourself, that you would redeem us as you redeemed Ruth. And God, I pray for the people here, people who don't believe, people who have not given their lives to you, people who have not made you the Lord of their lives. God, let this be the beginning of their love story with you. Let this be the beginning of how they were drawn to you and have come to you. And God, let their names be in the book of life. God, I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do for us. And I ask all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.